The love story of Princess Margaret, Elizabeth's younger sister, and Antony Armstrong-Jones, was just as dramatic in real life as what's depicted on The Crown's second season. As promised in a sultry photo shoot released earlier this year, The Crown's second season dives headlong into the intense relationship between Princess Margaret, played by Vanessa Kirby, and Antony Armstrong-Jones, Matthew Good, the photographer who became Lord Snowdon when he married Margaret in 1960. The romance and marriage is the center of two of the most daring episodes of The Crown's second season, which draw from the many things that are known about their explosive relationship, and infers some of the most dramatic details about what nobody but Margaret and Snowdon can know for sure. Below, a look at the true story of Margaret and Snowdon, and how it matches up with what happens on The Crown. And for a much more comprehensive recounting of the relationship, read this excerpt from Anne de Courcy's 2008 book Snowdon, the biography, which will be cited extensively below. But first, Billy Wallace. When Margaret first rejoins the action in The Crown's second season, having essentially sat out the first 3 episodes, she's a stone-faced guest at a wedding, still single, and telling her friend Billy Wallace, "No one wants to take me on, apparently." He then pulls out a spur-of-the-moment proposal, arguing that as her old faithful, he would be a sensible, if not entirely romantic, husband. In real life, Wallace was in fact one of Margaret's favored escorts, as described by de Courcy. In a 2002 piece for The Telegraph, Andrew Alderson wrote that Margaret decided to marry Wallace because it was better to marry somebody one at least liked. Their engagement ended not with the drunken duel depicted on The Crown, but with a brief affair he had on a trip to the Bahamas. It also happened a year before Margaret and Armstrong-Jones began seeing each other in 1958. The result, however, was the same. Princess Margaret was unforgiving, and decided she could do better. How they met. Depicted in both seasons of The Crown, Margaret was an active fixture in London's high-class social scene, which makes it easy to believe she asked her lady-in-waiting, Elizabeth Cavendish, to introduce her to anyone but a man who breeds horses, owns land, or knows my mother. Antony Armstrong-Jones fit the description, but by the time he and Margaret began spending time together in the spring of 1958, he was already acquainted with the royal family. In 1957, he had taken portraits of the Queen and her family on the grounds of Buckingham Palace, something he would continue to do for decades, even after his and Margaret's divorce. So while the dinner party meet-cute depicted on The Crown is fairly close to reality, his relationship with the royal family had already begun. The portrait of Margaret. The 4th episode of The Crown's second season ends with a stunning image of Princess Margaret, a portrait taken by Armstrong-Jones in which she appears to be naked, and which she, in a fit of rebelliousness, sent to the Times of London to be splashed across the country. The photograph on The Crown is a faithful recreation of one of the most famous portraits of Princess Margaret, but there's a catch. The real one was taken in 1967, when Armstrong-Jones and Margaret were already married and known as the Lord and Countess of Snowdon. Vanessa Kirby's recreation of the portrait, though, remains stunning. His other affairs. As with many personal relationships, not everything about Armstrong-Jones's personal life is on the record. After he began seeing Margaret, he definitely remained involved with the actress and dancer Jackie Chan, depicted in an unusually graphic sex scene in The Crown's 7th episode, whom de Courcy describes as Tony's first real love. As Michael Adine and Tommy Lascelles informed the Queen on The Crown when she begins to have doubts about her sister's relationship, Armstrong-Jones was also involved with Gina Ward at the same time as Princess Margaret, as late as the summer of 1959, though the third woman mentioned on The Crown, his secretary, Robin Banks, is said by de Courcy to have been in love with someone else. The most vividly depicted relationship on the show, and the one that would cause scandal even today, is the one with married couple Jeremy and Camilla Fry. The two were among Armstrong-Jones's closest friends, though the existence of a romantic relationship between all 3 of them is difficult to prove. Armstrong-Jones was suspected, even by Princess Margaret, of having homosexual leanings. "I enjoyed his company very much, but I didn't take a lot of notice of him because I thought he was queer," she later told her biographer Christopher Warwick, as recounted in de Courcy's book. Jeremy Fry had to step down from his role as Armstrong-Jones's best man at his wedding to Princess Margaret after the press discovered he had been arrested in 1952 for a minor homosexual offense, the reason given in the press at the time, according to DeCourcy, was a recurrence of jaundice, and Camilla Fry, as depicted in The Crown, gave birth to a daughter, Polly, in May 1960, just weeks after Armstrong-Jones married Princess Margaret. In 2004, Polly Fry took a DNA test, as revealed in DeCourcy's book, that proved Snowdon was, in fact, her father. She wrote in a op-ed for the Daily Mail in 2008, "Although we may like to think of our own generation as being wild and wonderful in comparison to what our parents got up to in the swinging 60s, we are mere innocents caught up in the aftermath of the post-war free love era." Peter Townsend moves on. Group captain Peter Townsend, whose doomed affair with Princess Margaret gave The Crown Season 1 much of its drama, did announce his engagement to Marie-Luce Jamaine, then 19 years old, in 1959, and he broke the news to Margaret in a letter. According to DeCourcy, however, Margaret received the letter while she and Armstrong-Jones were together at Balmoral Castle in October 1959, and at the time she encouraged Armstrong-Jones not to propose, to cement the public's impression that she was fully over Townsend. The proposal, according to DeCourcy, the engagement became official while Margaret and Armstrong-Jones were staying with the Frys, and Armstrong-Jones sought approval from the Queen over Christmas. The romantic proposal depicted on The Crown, with the boxes within boxes, may be entirely fictional, although Margaret's ring was a large ruby, which according to DeCourcy cost £250. The delayed announcement. Elizabeth did ask her sister to delay the announcement of her engagement until after the birth of Prince Andrew in February 1960. The engagement was announced 6 days later on February 26, the conga line. One of the most delightful details in DeCourcy's book made it straight to the screen in The Crown, at a party at Clarence House in October 1959. According to DeCourcy, the Queen Mother asked Margaret and her future son-in-law to lead a conga line up and down the stairs. Antony Armstrong-Jones's complicated childhood. The Crown scarcely has room for more complicated lineages and royal titles, but it makes valuable time to dive into Armstrong-Jones's background, his childhood bout with polio, and his complex relationship with his mother, the Countess of Ross, whom DeCourcy says referred to Tony as "my ugly son," and was thrilled by his upwardly mobile marriage to Margaret. His father, Ronnie Armstrong-Jones, a lawyer, was less enthusiastic. According to DeCourcy, he sent his son a note that said, "Boy, you would be mad to marry Princess Margaret. It will ruin your career." The wedding, held at Westminster Abbey on May 6, Margaret and Tony's, was the first royal wedding to be televised, and the guests did include his ex Jackie Chan, as well as his mother and two stepmothers. Winston Churchill was also there. According to DeCourcy, Margaret did not invite any of the staff at Clarence House who had cared for her over the years, and her departure to life as a married woman was a welcome one. DeCourcy writes, as Margaret passed him where he stood on the top step as the glass coach waited to take her to Westminster Abbey, Gordon bowed and said, "Goodbye, Your Royal Highness," adding as the coach pulled away, "And we hope forever." In a May 1960 feature on the wedding, Life magazine wrote, "From babyhood she had been the darling of a nation, and that the people of England, lately, like a caucus of fidgety parents, they had openly fretted because the princess was approaching 30 and spinsterhood." After T.S. Case King about the wildly unconventional union between Margaret and the photographer, who had led a life sufficiently exuberant to be called bohemian. Life gave into the excitement, the doting millions were electrified and delighted, the magazine conceded.